Poison, Sleep, Charm, Berserk. You've heard of them. You all haven't played the same games as each other, but you all know the vocabulary. And plus or minus a few effects, you can give a pretty good guess as to what these statuses will do in a game you've never played. A handful of common statuses show up in games over and over. But is that it? Is that all a status effect could be? Of course not. We've made a video before about why statuses are important to combat systems. They're built to create variety, to spice it up into something beyond a race to zero. But today, we're going beyond the basics. These are advanced status effects. Every game is a unique reality, built out of thin air. The developer creates all the rules. There are no limits to what a status effect could be. You have total creative freedom, and you'd be surprised how much a unique status effect can do structurally for a game. Let's get weird with it, and talk about some weird status effects. Hey, can you go pull up your character sheet and look at your career status? Damn, that's rough. Well, time to fix that with today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Back in college, Mike switched majors from chemistry to computer science a couple years in. He wasn't sure whether he'd enjoy a career in software engineering, but he took the leap and it worked out great. Software development can be an amazing career, but it's tough to get a sense of whether you'd enjoy the work. What if there was a cheap, easy, and fun way to try it out? Guess what? That's Boot.dev. They've created a back-end development curriculum with bite-sized lessons that teach you modern languages and techniques. You'll earn experience, unlock achievements, and complete quests as you compete on a global leaderboard, while learning the fundamentals of programming with Go and Python. You can't learn the code without building real projects, and Boot.dev has the tools for you to learn how. If you get stuck, their Discord community is full of thousands learning and helping people just like you get unstuck and back on the right path. They offer a 30-day, no questions asked refund policy, and even a free demo mode for every course. You really have nothing to lose. Try Boot.dev. Use my code DESIGNDOC to get 25% off your entire first year, if you pick the annual plan. Thanks to Boot.dev. So you have total creative control. What kinds of status effects could you come up with? What story do you want to write with that power? Let's start slow. You don't have to do all that much to make a new custom status. You could take a proven one and just give it a new coat of paint. Chapter 1. Debauchery. Poison that's called poison isn't exciting, but what if you call it something else? Hades' combat revolves around boons, abilities granted through favors of the gods, which modifies status effects to be deadlier and more complicated over the course of a run. Hades calls its poison Hangover, and it's the status of choice for Dionysus. The party god grants you tons of boons that relate to inflicting damage over time. It's a lot like poison. Every half second, enemies with a hangover take damage, and the effect can stack for more damage per tick. But unlike just poison, the new label gives more latitude to add bonus effects that play with the theme. The party and alcohol connotations of an effect like hangover can be played up in boons like splitting headache, which increases critical hit rates on anyone afflicted with it. Peer pressure, where the hangover spreads from enemy to enemy. Bad influence, where you get a buff when 3 or more enemies have hangovers. Or numbing sensation, which makes those affected move slower. The creative reskin of something common like poison into something unique like hangover makes it easier for players to accept and remember new elements of a status effect, which is especially important in a game like Hades, where modifying statuses is core to the game's combat depth. The new label helps shake loose the player's preconceived notions of what the status is and what it could become. But what could you become? Chapter 2. Lycanthropy and Friends. One of the most straightforward things a custom status effect could do is disable a game action. Easy. Maybe a little dull by itself though. How can you spice it up? Lots of games do it with a transformation. The first Kid Icarus had an enemy called the Eggplant Wizard. Guess what he turns you into? Have you ever seen an eggplant punch a man to death? No? Exactly. You don't even have arms. Pit can't fight as an eggplant. so all you can do is retreat to a hospital and cure the status. Kid Icarus Uprising kept that effect around, and added a new one with a more dangerous angle. I guess it could have been any food, but they made a tempura wizard. Guess what he turns you into? Once you're tempura, the wizard will chase and try to eat you. It's an immediate one-hit KO if you're caught. Players have to run for their lives until the effect wears off. It's silly, but it's memorable, and the extra mechanical twist will change how you play the game. A disabling transformation is a good opportunity to bring in elements of the game's characters or setting to a fight. Luxord in Kingdom Hearts 2 is obsessed with gambling and chance, and his fight's custom transformation effect turns you into a die. When you're crushed into a cube, you can't do all the actions you normally could. You're slower, you can't use basically any of your skills, and your movement is, well, they tried to make the animation look good, I guess. Super Mario RPG turns you into, what else? A mushroom, where you can only regen and defend until it wears off. Also Scarecrow, which doesn't take away quite as many powers. You can still fire special attacks, but you can't walk up and punch them. These effects don't have to be novelties either. You could make them the element the gameplay revolves around. Wario Land has about 1 billion goofy transformations that change how you move in the world. Get flattened, zombied, vampired, on-fired, drunk, but not exactly, sprung, or turned into a ball of string, and figure out how to navigate a world that's all of a sudden not so Wario-friendly. A disabling status by itself can be underwhelming, but dress it up a little as a transformation effect, and you can make it one of the most memorable parts of your game. Chapter 3: Melancholy. You can make a weird status effect anything you want, and that flexibility means you can make it fit into very specific elements of your game, like making one play up your game's unique story themes. Earthbound does that. You're Ness, a 10-year-old kid, ripped from his life in suburbia to take on a quest to fulfill your grand destiny. It's a typical JRPG, but the game's setting made it stand out in 1995, and helped inspire, I couldn't even tell you how many modern games. The whole thing is in a contemporary 90s setting, with funny, irreverent monsters, moves, and locations. The game's status effects also lean into that vibe. Some are creative reskins of the typical statuses. Instead of poison, you get a cold and nausea. Instead of blindness, your characters get teary-eyed. There's some fun ones with unusual mechanics like mushroomized, which messes with your controls, and possessed, which makes a tiny ghost attack you every turn. But I think the game's most memorable status is a simple one: homesickness. A while after you start your journey, level 16 or so, you might notice Ness wasting some turns. The box starts talking about how Ness is thinking about his mom, how he craves his favorite food, or how he's just lost the will to fight. Under the hood, it's a paralysis effect, a 1 in 8 chance of Ness losing a turn. You can catch homesickness at the end of any battle at random, and it's a real problem if you get it in the middle of a dungeon or right before a boss. But the cure is simple enough. Just pick up the phone and call your mom, or visit somewhere that reminds you of home, or talk to this weirdo. You all fixed up. It's a simple effect, but the flavor text in fights and the unusual way to cure it help reinforce that you're not playing as some nameless avatar, or a battle-hardened chosen one. You are just a kid, dealing with fear and anxiety, out on the greatest adventure of your life. That small bit of flavoring and a one-off status effect helps make the world of Earthbound feel just that much more real. Earthbound's weird statuses have a tasteful allusion to some of the game's themes, but why be subtle when you can be really, really on the nose? Chapter 4: Isolation. Mario and Luigi Brothership is all about the importance of bonds and connectivity. The plot has Mario and Luigi sailing around the land of Concordia, a set of isolated islands that were once a great continent. You two go around working to reunite the world through the power of connections, both spiritual and electrical. The devs are not shy about really hammering home the theme. Most of the NPCs even take after electrical plugs and outlets. Even more so than the rest of the series, in this game, Mario and Luigi's combat abilities rely on the two to pair up. Even your basic attacks have both brothers working together to deal more damage. And of course, the series staple Bros moves return. The theme of bonds and cooperation even extends to enemies. They often have their own co-op attacks. They're not even bros and they'll mess you up. That's the power of teamwork. Eventually, you'll run into Gloam. It's a corrupting energy, infecting anyone it touches, forcing them to want to isolate themselves from others. In gameplay, Gloam works as both an enemy modifier and as a negative status if it gets on the bros. As the game progresses, more and more enemies infected with Gloam appear. They'll get a wide range of buffs. Attacks become faster, they might make a spiked shield to defend with. Some gain temporary stat boosts. Some might start counterattacking, or explode on defeat. But when they're all gloomed up, enemies act in their own self-interest. They won't work together to perform cooperative attacks, and some might even skip their turn. Since Gloam spreads on contact, you're at risk of catching it all the time. If it latches on, it severs the bond between brothers. Neither can work together. No bros attacks. No Luigi logic. You can still hit back, but it'll be the weaker solo attack. Gloam severely hurts your damage output, and unlike other status effects, it doesn't wear off on its own. Normal recovery items only give a 50-50 shot of healing it too. You might have to go find the really good antidote. Gloam is a great example of an effect that makes gameplay and narrative work together. The buffs it gives enemies, and the severe debuffs it gives you make the narrative threat real. And not just a thing for characters to wax poetically about, it drives home the game's premise in a tangible way. So far, we've talked about a lot of things around the edges of a game, small mechanical bits here and there for flavor, but you could make a weird status effect more important. If you wanted to, you could make it the backbone for all of a game's combat. Chapter 5. Animal Fights for Money. Cassette Beasts has a type chart of 14 elements. You know how people want more complexity in the Pokemon type chart? Well, here you go. All the types interact with each other to create status effects depending on what hits what. Each of these statuses are named, and there are dozens of them. The combo might buff, debuff, or even change the type of the monster to something else. A plastic type gets hit by a fire attack? Well, the plastic will melt and create a coating that changes the type of the defender to poison. Water hits earth? You've eroded the earth type, and they get a defensive penalty. Poison hits metal? Well, now you've made your opponent a poison-tipped weapon, and the metal type will deal extra poison damage on its future attacks. The chart of unique combos can be a lot to remember, but the game does give you a heads up as to what the attack you're about to do will result in. This complexity is the backbone of Cassette Beasts' combat system, and the way each monster can morph and change mid-battle helps make the combat more complex and strategic than the more straightforward, overpowering approach that Pokemon's combat can often be. There's one special element though, dedicated to transmuting monsters into other types. It's glitter. There are no natural glitter type monsters in the game, but a glitter type move will do the job. Use a glitter move on anything, and it immediately becomes a glitter type monster. Attacking a glitter type with any move will then coat the monster, and turn it into that attack's type for a few turns. You can make some crazy setups by strategically changing types mid-battle, and you have to be on your toes to defend against those combos as well. I haven't seen many RPGs with this wide a range of status effects, with this much emphasis on them for creating the complexity of the game's combat system. It moves Cassette Beasts' combat beyond the usual rock-paper-scissors style that so many RPG combat systems default to. It's what I think makes the game stand out in a sea of Pokemon clones. A weird status could be absolutely anything you can dream up. Nothing is too intricate or too grand. Nothing is too custom. If you can come up with an effect that could only ever exist in your game, that status could become one of a game's signature elements by itself. Chapter 6. A reckless disregard of workplace health. Dragon's Dogma 2 is an action RPG. The game's sorta, kinda, almost like if you mixed a Kingdom Heart into Elden Ring, where you travel around with computer-controlled companions called pawns. You, the Arisen, rely on your pawns to watch your back. though not really any individual pawn. If one falls, it's too bad, but there's more where that came from. You've got a squad of replacements waiting in the rift, pulled in from a pool of creative characters in other people's playthroughs. Summon a Gandalf, or that lady from Elden Ring, and be on your way. The pawns are interchangeable, not really worth paying attention to. Oh no. Well, turns out that not paying attention to your new pawn's health has killed an entire village and possibly bricked your save. One of your new recruits brought Dragon's Plague with them, and I don't blame you if you didn't notice. The game's UI doesn't give you a direct heads up. If you want to be safe, you have to moonlight as a physician and spot the symptoms in any pawn you bring in. Good luck, the symptoms are pretty low-key. Your pawns are normally very deferential to you, especially ones with more timid and kind temperaments. Pawns who catch Dragon's Plague become a lot more assertive than their normal selves. But all that might mean is a kind-hearted pawn says a line that only the straightforward pawns would say. Maybe a pawn stops listening to your orders. That might raise some eyebrows. In combat, they're stronger too. Not a bad perk to have, except for that other part. The one unmistakable sign of Dragon's Plague is the glowing red eyes, but you have to look for it. You'll have to get all up in there to see it too. And remember to take any pawn's mask off to check. They block your pawn's eyes. Dragon's Plague is a constant threat. Anyone you bring in might have it. Even pawns that get rented out to other people's games might come back with the plague. Better check again. If you don't and you go to sleep sick, that pawn will kill everyone in town, including story NPCs. Then the game will autosave and force you to deal with the aftermath. You can unbrick your save file with wake stones if you need to, but it's not cheap. To cure it, you've gotta just kill the pawn yourself. A cliff will do. Once dead, you can bring your pawn back from the rift and go on like normal. Dragon's Plague is a totally original status effect, playing off of unique game mechanics, and half of its charm comes from how hard it is to detect with the tools you have. A little bit of intentional UI obtuseness results in one of the most surprising, impactful, and memorable status effects in recent memory. If you're making a custom status, absolutely nothing has to be off the table. Chapter 7. Atheism. That's right, we're getting real. In Final Fantasy Tactics, you can inflict atheism. Alright, it's called innocent in some versions, but you can attack people with atheism. Cast doubt or disbelief, or hit them with the Goku pole, and your target gains the status effect, Atheist. All atheists in the game have their faith, which is a numerical stat, set to 0. Faith in Final Fantasy Tactics impacts how magically receptive you are in totality. There's no separate magic attack and defense stat in this game, it's all one thing. The more faith you have, the more magic will affect you, positive and negative. High faith characters get healed more and deal more damage. A character inflicted with Atheist effectively denies magic in its entirety. 0 faith means 0 interactions with magic. Players can't heal or be healed. They can't attack with magic, but they also can't be attacked. They're immune to taking magical damage, as long as the effect lasts. The quirky way that faith factors into both offense and defense lets you build some crazy strategies around the effect. If you're facing powerful spellcasters, you can simply renounce your faith and take away a ton of their danger, as long as you don't need to heal. Atheist fits the core themes of the game's story, a struggle against a corrupt and power-hungry church, and a crisis of faith. It takes advantage of the original elements of the game's combat to spin up fresh mechanical ideas, where magic is a tool that, the more you can wield it, the more it can be wielded against you. I love it. It's a beautiful design, delivering a level of theming, balance, and care that fits perfectly into this world. And it's hard to think of a game that could do all of that any better. And it's still a weird status effect. Checkmate, Atheist. Do you know how many weird contenders I had to cut for this episode? There's so many. Enough for a part 2 for sure. Head to the comments and let's talk about your favorite unusual status effects. You could also join our Patreon, where patrons get a sneak peek of what we're making, and a chance to shape the episodes of the future. Status effects could be almost anything. Reskin a proven one, combine elements, or come up with something completely original, and it'll help spice up any game.